The insurance document wasn't supposed to be in that drawer. I had been looking for a recipe card, my grandmother's cornbread, the one Roger always raved about during our 42 years of marriage. Instead, my fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope, tucked beneath outdated tax returns and forgotten birthday cards. I might have overlooked it entirely if it weren't for the date stamp, March 17th of this year. Just 3 weeks ago. My name is Elena Derrick, and at 64, I'd long since stopped believing in coincidences. 4 decades of teaching high school English had honed my attention to detail, my ability to spot inconsistencies in stories. And this, an envelope I'd never seen before, hidden in a drawer Roger knew I rarely opened. This was the beginning of a story I hadn't anticipated. I slid the papers free, smoothing them against the polished oak of our kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, raised 2 children, and grown old together. The afternoon light spilled through the bay windows, illuminating the bold text at the top of the document. Life insurance policy. My heart gave a small stutter. Not unusual to have life insurance, certainly. Roger and I had modest policies on each other, taken out decades ago when the children were small. But this was new. And it wasn't on Roger. It was on me. For $2 million. $2 million that hadn't been there the month before, when we'd met with our financial advisor for our annual review. $2 million that Roger had never mentioned. I examined the dates carefully. The policy had been initiated on March 10th, with the first premium payment processed on March 15th. I frowned, something tugging at my memory. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my calendar. There it was. March 8th through 14th, my trip to visit our daughter Sarah in Portland. I had flown out to help with our newest grandchild, Emma, born 2 weeks premature while Sarah's husband was away on business. Roger had begged off, claiming a flare-up of his arthritis made the cross-country flight too painful. I'd been gone exactly 1 week. He'd taken out the policy while I was on the other side of the country. The kettle whistled, startling me. I folded the papers with trembling hands, returning them exactly as I'd found them. As I prepared my afternoon tea, I tried to rationalize what I'd discovered. Perhaps it was innocent. Extra protection as we aged, a surprise he planned to tell me about. But why hide it? Why not mention it during our regular Sunday money talks? And why so much? Our home was long paid off, our children established in their careers. We lived comfortably on our pensions and investments, but we had never been wealthy. $2 million was an extraordinary sum. As I sipped my Earl Grey, a memory surfaced. A conversation from last month, when I'd returned from my book club. "You seem distracted," I'd remarked, noticing how Roger barely looked up from his laptop when I entered the room. Oh, just doing some research." "On what?" He'd closed the screen quickly. "Nothing important." "How was the book?" I hadn't thought much of it then. After 42 years, you learn to give each other space. Now, I wondered what he'd been researching so intently. I was still pondering this when I heard the garage door open. Roger was home from his golf game, earlier than expected. I took a steadying breath, deciding to observe rather than confront. If my suspicions were groundless, I'd be relieved. If not, well, I'd need more than an unexplained insurance policy before jumping to conclusions.
"Elena."
Roger's voice carried from the entryway, followed by the familiar thud of his golf bag against the wall. "You home?" "In the kitchen," I called back, schooling my features into normalcy. He appeared in the doorway, tall and still handsome at 67, with silver hair and the same blue eyes I'd fallen for at university. He smiled, the same smile that had once made my heart race, but now sent a chill down my spine. "You're home early," I observed. Game ended sooner than expected. Ted wasn't feeling well. He crossed to the refrigerator, retrieving a bottle of water. "What have you been up to?" The lie came easily. Just organizing some recipes. Thought I'd make your favorite cornbread with dinner. Roger's smile widened. That sounds wonderful. You know how I love your cornbread. I searched his face for any sign, any tell that might betray ulterior motives. There was nothing, just the familiar expression of a man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. That night, as Roger slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Perhaps I was being paranoid. People took out life insurance policies all the time. But the timing, the secrecy, the amount, it all felt wrong. I needed more information, and I knew just where to start. Tomorrow, while Roger was at his weekly physical therapy appointment, I would begin my investigation in earnest. Little did I know that what I would discover over the coming days would reshape everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man who had shared my bed for more than 4 decades. The next morning dawned with a kind of pristine clarity that only spring in New England can offer. Sunlight filtered through our bedroom curtains, casting dappled shadows across the walls. Roger was already up. I could hear him in the kitchen, the familiar symphony of coffee brewing and news playing softly on the radio. I remained in bed a moment longer, gathering my thoughts. Today was Thursday, Roger's standing appointment with Dr. Weiss for his shoulder therapy. 2 hours where I could search without interruption. When I finally made my way downstairs, Roger was seated at the kitchen island, newspapers spread before him, a mug of coffee steaming at his elbow. He glanced up with a smile that seemed entirely too normal for a man potentially plotting his wife's demise. Morning, sunshine. Coffee's fresh. I returned his smile, careful to maintain our routine. Thanks. Any plans today, besides therapy? Might stop by the hardware store after. Thinking of fixing that loose railing on the back deck this weekend. He took a sip of his coffee. Book club committee meeting at noon. We're finalizing next month's selection. Another easy lie. Book club wasn't until next week. Roger nodded, returning to his newspaper. I poured myself coffee, the normality of the moment almost making me doubt what I'd found yesterday. Almost. After Roger left for his appointment, I waited 15 minutes to ensure he wouldn't return for something forgotten, then began my search in earnest. I started with his office, the small converted den where he kept his important papers and personal computer. His laptop was password protected, of course, but after 4 decades of marriage, there were few secrets between us. Or so I'd thought. I typed in the standard password he used for everything, Elena Day 1979, the day we met. The screen remained locked. I tried our anniversary, his birthday, the children's birthdays. Nothing worked. That in itself was telling. Roger had changed his password to something I would know. I moved on to his desk drawers, methodically working through each one. Most contained what you'd expect: office supplies, old technology manuals, and used greeting cards. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of warranties for appliances we no longer owned, I found another envelope. This one contained bank statements for an account I'd never seen before, at a bank we didn't use. According to the statement, the account had been opened in January, just 3 months ago, with an initial deposit of $50,000. My blood ran cold. The money had come from our joint investment account, a withdrawal I remembered Roger explaining as a transfer to our regular savings for a planned kitchen renovation. But it had never arrived there. Instead, it had gone to this secret account, which now held just under $47,000. Where had the missing $3,000 gone? I continued searching until I found a third envelope, this one containing receipts. One for a consultation with an attorney I didn't recognize. Another for a private investigator, the name Blackwell Investigations embossed in discreet gray lettering. And several more from a high-end jewelry store in Boston, totaling just over $3,000. I'd received no jewelry from Roger in recent months. The picture forming was both clear and devastating. Roger had withdrawn a significant sum from our joint accounts, consulted with an attorney, hired a private investigator, purchased jewelry for someone else, and taken out a substantial life insurance policy on me, all within the past 3 months. The conclusion was obvious, if unthinkable. My husband of 42 years was having an affair and considering a permanent solution to his marital obligations. I sat in his office chair, documents spread before me, feeling oddly calm. The emotional breakdown would come later, I was certain. For now, analytical teacher mode had taken over. I needed more information. I needed proof beyond circumstantial evidence. And most importantly, I needed to protect myself. I carefully returned everything to its proper place, leaving no trace of my investigation. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first to our family attorney, not the one Roger had consulted. The second to our financial advisor. And the third to my oldest friend, Margaret, who had stood beside me through every crisis since college. By the time Roger returned from physical therapy, I had composed myself and formulated a plan. I would watch, wait, and gather evidence. I would secure my own financial resources and legal protection. And I would find out exactly what, or who, had driven my husband to such desperate measures after more than 4 decades of what I had believed was a happy marriage. "How is therapy?" I asked as he entered the kitchen, my voice remarkably steady. "Same as always. Painful but necessary." He rolled his shoulder demonstratively. "Weiss thinks another month and I might be back to normal." I nodded sympathetically, wondering if anything would ever be normal again. "That's good. I made some lunch if you're hungry." As we ate sandwiches in companionable silence, a silence now filled with unspoken suspicions and betrayals, I studied the man across from me. The familiar lines of his face, the hands that had held mine through 2 childbirths, a cancer scare, and the deaths of both my parents. The mouth that had whispered, "I love you," every night for thousands of nights. Who was this person really? And what was he capable of? The answers, I feared, would destroy the life we had built together. But I had to know. Whatever came next, I had to know. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I noted Roger's comings and goings, his phone habits, his moods. I documented unexplained absences and overheard fragments of hushed phone conversations. I watched our bank accounts with hawk-like intensity, monitoring every transaction through our online banking portal. Roger, meanwhile, seemed to notice nothing amiss, or if he did, he gave no indication. Our routines continued as they had for decades. We shared meals, watched our favorite programs, discussed our children and grandchildren. He kissed me goodbye each morning and hello each evening. We even made love twice, encounters that left me feeling hollow and confused afterward. How could someone fake such intimacy? Or was I the one who had constructed an elaborate fiction based on an insurance policy I didn't understand and bank transfers that might have innocent explanations? But then came the business trip. A 3-day conference in Chicago that Roger had mentioned casually over dinner one night. The American Engineers Association is hosting a panel on structural innovations. Thought I'd attend, reconnect with some old colleagues. He'd been retired from his engineering firm for 4 years, but maintained professional connections. "That sounds nice," I'd replied, mind racing. In 42 years of marriage, Roger had attended perhaps 5 conferences without me. "When is it?" "Next week, Tuesday through Thursday." The timing was suspect. My annual checkup with Dr. Bennett was scheduled for that Wednesday, a standing appointment Roger had entered into our shared calendar months ago. That night, after Roger was asleep, I slipped out of bed and checked his laptop again. He'd left it on the kitchen counter, and to my surprise, it wasn't locked. Perhaps he'd grown careless, or perhaps he'd decided I wasn't a threat. His browser history revealed searches for Chicago hotels and flights, seemingly confirming his story. But then I noticed something else, searches for undetectable poisons, natural toxins that mimic heart attacks, and average police investigation time for sudden death. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. I took photos of the screen with my phone, then carefully closed the browser to exactly where it had been. Back in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to Roger's even breathing beside me. The man I had loved for most of my life was researching ways to kill me. The next morning, I called Margaret. "I need you to come stay with me next week," I said without preamble when she answered.
Elena?
"What's wrong?" Concern filtered through the phone. "Roger's going to a conference. I don't want to be alone." I couldn't bring myself to voice my true fears. Not yet. Not without absolute certainty. Margaret, bless her, asked no questions. "Of course. I'll be there." Tuesday through Thursday. He leaves Tuesday morning. I'll pack a bag. We'll have a proper girls' retreat. The relief was palpable. Margaret had been a detective's wife for 30 years before Harold's retirement. She would understand the situation better than most, and I trusted her judgment implicitly. Roger left for Chicago early Tuesday morning, kissing me goodbye at the door, his overnight bag in hand. "I'll call when I land," he promised. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street, then immediately called Margaret. "He's gone. Can you come over now?" She arrived 30 minutes later, overnight bag in one hand, a box of supporting documents in the other. "Show me everything," she said the moment she entered. I laid it all out, the insurance policy, the bank statements, the receipts, the browser history. Margaret examined each piece methodically, her expression growing grimmer by the minute. "You need to go to the police," she said finally. I shook my head. With what? Suspicious internet searches? A life insurance policy that could be perfectly legitimate? They'd laugh me out of the station. "Then we need more evidence," Margaret declared. "And you need protection. I'm not leaving your side until we figure this out." That evening, Roger called as promised, his voice warm and normal over the speakerphone as Margaret and I listened. "The hotel is spectacular," he enthused. "Right on the river, view of the whole city. You'd love it, Elena. We should come back together sometime." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, catching Margaret's eye. She shook her head slightly, her expression troubled. "How was your day?" he asked. "Quiet. Just catching up on some reading." I didn't mention Margaret's presence. "How was the conference?" "Fascinating. Reconnected with Bill Harris. Remember him from the Philadelphia Project? He's doing remarkable work with sustainable materials now." The conversation continued for several minutes, all perfectly ordinary. After we hung up, Margaret sighed. "He's good. Very good." "Or innocent," I suggested half-heartedly. "Let's check," Margaret said, pulling out her phone. She dialed a number from memory. "Harold? It's me. Need a favor. Can you call your buddy Steve at Chicago PD and ask him to drive by the Riverside Grand Hotel? See if he can confirm whether a Roger Derrick checked in there today." An hour later, her phone rang. She listened, thanked the caller, and hung up with a grim expression. No Roger Derrick registered at the Riverside Grand. In fact, no engineering conference happening there this week. My world tilted sideways. Then where is he? That's what we need to find out. But first, we need to make sure you're safe when he returns. The next day was my doctor's appointment, the one Roger had suspiciously scheduled his conference around.
Dr.
Bennett found nothing unusual during my checkup, pronouncing me in excellent health for a woman of 64. "Keep doing whatever you're doing, Elena," she said cheerfully. "Your blood work from last time was perfect. Heart strong, blood pressure ideal. You'll outlive us all." As Margaret and I drove home, a thought occurred to me. "The coffee," I said suddenly. "What coffee?" "Every morning for the past month, Roger has insisted on making my coffee. Says he's perfected the ratio of beans to water." I gripped the dashboard. Margaret, what if he's been testing something? Something that wouldn't show up in standard blood work. Margaret's hands tightened on the steering wheel. When does he get back? Tomorrow afternoon. Then we'll be ready for him. That night, we devised a plan. Margaret would leave visibly in the morning but return through the back entrance, remaining hidden in the house. I would act normally, greeting Roger when he returned, accepting his customary offer of coffee. But I wouldn't drink it. Morning came, and with it a text from Roger. Coming home early. Flight lands at 11. Can't wait to see you. Margaret and I exchanged glances. Change of plans, she said. I'll hide now. By the time Roger's key turned in the lock at noon, Margaret was concealed in our rarely used formal dining room, with a clear view of the kitchen. I sat at the kitchen island, reading a novel, the picture of a wife innocently awaiting her husband's return.
Elena.
Roger called, setting down his bag in the entryway. In the kitchen, I replied, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain he would hear it. He appeared in the doorway, smiling that familiar smile that now seemed like a stranger's. Miss me? Of course. I stood to embrace him, fighting the urge to recoil. How was the rest of the conference? Enlightening. He kissed my cheek. Let me freshen up, then I'll tell you all about it over coffee. While Roger showered, I texted Margaret. It's happening. Get ready. 20 minutes later, Roger returned to the kitchen, looking refreshed in clean clothes, his hair still damp. Sit, he insisted. Let me take care of you. You're always taking care of everyone else. I obeyed, resuming my place at the island, watching as he methodically prepared coffee in our French press. His movements were practiced, precise, but then they always had been. Roger Derrick was nothing if not meticulous. I've been thinking, he said conversationally as he worked. We should take a trip. Maybe the Amalfi Coast? You've always wanted to see Italy. That sounds lovely. I managed my throat dry. He poured 2 cups of coffee, adding just the right amount of cream to mine, exactly as I liked it. But as he set the cup before me, I noticed something odd. A faint, metallic smell beneath the rich coffee aroma. So subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been hyper-aware of every detail. Drink up while it's hot, Roger urged, taking a sip from his own cup. I raised mine to my lips, pretending to sip, but not allowing any liquid to enter my mouth. Perfect, I murmured. Roger watched me intently, an unfamiliar expression in his eyes. Anticipation? Concern? Everything okay? You seem tense. Just tired. Didn't sleep well with you gone. I set the cup down, sliding it slightly away from me. Tell me about Chicago. How was the conference? Fascinating. He launched into a detailed account of panels and speakers, all fiction I now knew. As he spoke, I noticed him glancing repeatedly at my coffee cup, noting how little I'd consumed. You're not drinking your coffee, he observed during a pause in his fabricated travelogue. It's a bit hot still. I'll get to it. I smiled, feeling my face stretch unnaturally with the effort. Roger reached across the island suddenly, taking my hand in his. Elena, are you sure you're feeling all right? You look pale. The concern in his voice seemed genuine, which only heightened the surreality of the moment. This man, who had shared my life for more than 4 decades, was sitting across from me, holding my hand, while a poisoned coffee cooled between us. Actually, I said slowly, I am feeling a bit strange. Roger's expression shifted subtly. Relief? Maybe you should lie down. I can help you upstairs. No, I said quickly. I think I'll just sit here a moment. He frowned, checking his watch discreetly. At least finish your coffee. The caffeine might help. The moment stretched between us, taut with unspoken tension. I knew I had to make a decision. Confrontation or continuation of the charade. In the end, instinct took over. Actually, I said, I think you should drink it. Roger blinked. What? My coffee. You drink it. His expression darkened. Don't be ridiculous. I have my own. Then let's swap. I'm suddenly in the mood for it black. I pushed my cup toward him and reached for his. Roger's hand shot out, catching my wrist with surprising strength. Elena, what's going on? The facade was crumbling. I looked into the eyes of the man I had loved for most of my life and saw a stranger looking back. I think, I said carefully, that you should explain what's in my coffee, Roger. His grip on my wrist tightened painfully. You're not making sense. Maybe you're having some kind of episode. I should call Dr. Bennett. I saw her yesterday. She says I'm in perfect health. I met his gaze steadily. Unlike you, I actually went where I said I was going. Roger's face went blank, then reassembled itself into a mask of confused concern. Elena, you're not well. Let me help you to bed, and we can sort this out.
No.
I pulled my wrist free with difficulty. What I need is for you to explain the insurance policy, the secret bank account, the jewelry receipts, and the poison you just tried to give me. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask dropped completely, revealing an expression I had never seen on my husband's face in 42 years of marriage.
Cold. Calculating.
Devoid of the love I had believed in for most of my life. How long have you known? He asked, his voice flat. Long enough. I edged backward, suddenly afraid in a way I had never been in my own home. Roger's gaze flickered to my untouched coffee, then back to my face. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Margaret, I called, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. From the dining room doorway, Margaret stepped into view, her phone held up, recording. It's all on video, Roger. The coffee, the conversation, everything. Roger's face contorted with rage. He lunged across the island, sending coffee cups flying, his hands reaching for my throat. But Margaret was faster. The heavy wooden cutting board connected with the back of Roger's head, sending him crashing to the floor. I stumbled backward, gasping, as Margaret moved swiftly to my side. Are you okay? I nodded, unable to speak, staring at my husband's unconscious form on our kitchen floor, the same floor where we had danced on our 40th anniversary, where our grandchildren had taken their first steps. I've already called 911, Margaret said, her arm around my shoulders. They're on their way. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. He really was trying to kill me. Margaret nodded grimly. And from the look on his face when you confronted him, he would have succeeded eventually. She gestured to the spilled coffee. We'll need to preserve that as evidence. As the wail of sirens approached in the distance, I looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of our family home for decades. The photos on the refrigerator, the silly magnets collected from family vacations, the handprint art from grandchildren. All that shared history, built on what now appeared to be a foundation of lies. Or had it become a lie only recently? Had Roger loved me once, truly, before something changed? Before someone else became more important than 42 years of marriage? I didn't know. But as police officers entered our home and paramedics attended to the unconscious stranger on my kitchen floor, I realized I would have the time to find out. Thanks to a suspicious insurance policy, a metallic smell in my coffee, and the kind of intuition that only comes from a lifetime of paying attention to details, I would live to uncover the truth, whatever that truth might be. The police station smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I sat in an interview room, a paper cup of water untouched before me, Margaret a reassuring presence at my side. Detective Harriman, a compact woman with shrewd eyes and prematurely gray hair, reviewed my statement for the third time. Let me make sure I understand, she said, glancing up from her notes. You discovered a life insurance policy taken out on you without your knowledge. You found evidence of unexplained financial transactions. You confirmed your husband was not where he claimed to be. And then, upon his return, you believe he attempted to poison you. Yes, I said simply. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and remote, as if belonging to someone else. And you have documentation for the financial transactions and insurance policy? My attorney has copies of everything. I provided her with all the evidence as I discovered it. Detective Harriman nodded, making another note. Smart. And the coffee. The officers took samples from both cups and the French press. Margaret interjected. I made sure they preserved everything according to protocol. Harriman's lip twitched, almost a smile. Former law enforcement? Detective's wife. 30 years.
Ah.
A look of understanding passed between them. Well, Mrs. Derrick, we've sent the coffee samples to the lab for analysis. Your husband is currently receiving medical attention, but once he's cleared, he'll be brought in for questioning. And then? I asked. That depends on what we find in the coffee and what he says. She closed her notebook. For now, I'd advise you not to return home. Is there somewhere you can stay? She's coming with me, Margaret said firmly. My husband is a retired detective. She'll be safe with us. Harriman seemed satisfied with this arrangement. We'll be in touch as soon as we have more information. In the meantime, if you think of anything else that might be relevant, call me directly. She slid a business card across the table. As we left the station, the reality of my situation began to sink in. My husband of 42 years was in custody, suspected of attempting to murder me. I was essentially homeless, the safety of my own home shattered by betrayal. And I still had no idea why. What had driven Roger to such extremes after decades of what I had believed was a happy marriage? What happens now? I asked Margaret as we drove to her home in the lengthening shadows of early evening. Now, she said, her eyes on the road, we find out why your husband tried to kill you. Margaret and Harold's guest room became my sanctuary over the next few days. Harold, a bear of a man with gentle eyes and a detective's natural skepticism, took it upon himself to retrieve essential items from my home while police processed the scene. Place is crawling with technicians, he reported upon his return. They're being thorough, which is good. Bagging everything, testing surfaces. If Roger left any trace evidence of earlier attempts, they'll find it. The thought that there might have been earlier attempts, that the perfect coffee Roger had been making for me each morning might have contained gradually increasing doses of poison, made me physically ill. On the third day after Roger's arrest, Detective Harriman called with an update. The lab had confirmed the presence of a substance called thallium in my coffee cup, a tasteless, odorless poison that, in small doses, caused symptoms similar to a variety of illnesses and in larger doses, could be fatal. It's sometimes called the poisoner's poison, Harriman explained, because it's hard to detect without specific testing. But in this case, he used too much. That's why you notice the metallic smell. Is that why he scheduled his business trip around my doctor's appointment? I asked, the pieces falling into place. To ensure I wouldn't have blood work done that might detect it?
Possibly.
We're still investigating. Harriman paused. There's something else. We found evidence that your husband has been engaging in a relationship with another woman. Despite everything, despite the poisoned coffee and the attempted murder, despite 42 years of marriage ending in the most horrific betrayal imaginable, those words still had the power to wound me deeply.
Who?
I managed. A woman named Christine Lauder. According to our investigation, they've been involved for approximately 6 months. The name meant nothing to me. Is she young? I asked, hating how vulnerable the question made me feel. No, Mrs. Derrick. She's 61, a widow. She apparently believes your husband is also widowed. I sat heavily on Margaret's guest bed, The phone clutched in my suddenly nerveless hand. He told her I was dead? It appears so. We'll be interviewing her today. She may have had no knowledge of his true circumstances or intentions. After ending the call, I sat motionless, trying to process this new information. Roger hadn't just betrayed me with another woman, he had erased me entirely, creating a fiction where I no longer existed. Perhaps, in his mind, that made it easier to contemplate making the fiction a reality. Margaret found me still sitting there an hour later, staring blankly at the wall.
Elena?
What did Harriman say? I relayed the information mechanically, each word like glass in my mouth. When I finished, Margaret sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. I'm so sorry. 42 years, I whispered. Was any of it real? Margaret squeezed my hand. I don't know, but we're going to find out. The next day, Detective Harriman called again, this time requesting that I come to the station. We've interviewed Ms. Lauder and your husband. I think you should hear what we've learned. Harold drove us to the station, his natural protectiveness amplified by his law enforcement background. You don't have to do this today, he reminded me as we parked. It can wait until you're ready. But I was ready. The initial shock had given way to a cold, clear determination to understand exactly what had happened to my marriage and why my husband of more than 4 decades had decided my death was preferable to a divorce. Detective Harriman met us in the lobby, her expression grave. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Derrick. This way, please. She led us to a conference room rather than the interview room for my previous visit. A laptop was set up on the table, along with a folder of documents. Before I show you these materials, I want to prepare you. Some of this will be difficult to hear. But based on our interviews with your husband and Ms. Lauder, as well as evidence recovered from your home and other locations, we've pieced together a timeline of events that led to the attempt on your life. I nodded, steeling myself. I understand. Harriman opened the folder. According to our investigation, your husband began his relationship with Christine Lauder approximately 7 months ago, after meeting her at a fundraising event for the hospital where his sister was treated for cancer. Ms. Lauder is on the hospital board. She slid a photograph across the table, a silver-haired woman with an elegant bearing and expensively tailored clothes. Attractive, certainly, but not young. Not a trophy girlfriend, but a peer. From the beginning, he presented himself as a widower. According to Ms. Lauder, he told her his wife, you, had died of cancer 3 years earlier. I stared at the photograph, trying to comprehend the level of deception required to maintain such a fiction. But we socialize regularly. We have friends, family. How could he possibly think no one would mention me? He was careful to keep Ms. Lauder separate from his existing social circles. The relationship was conducted primarily in Boston, where she maintains an apartment. Your husband would visit her there, claiming to be attending engineering conferences or consulting jobs. Those unexplained absences over the past months suddenly made sense. The late nights, the weekend golf tournaments that never seemed to result in trophies or stories. Meanwhile, our regular life continued, dinners with friends, visits from our children and grandchildren, all the routines of a long-established marriage. As the relationship progressed, Harriman continued, Ms. Lauder began pressing for a more permanent arrangement. She wanted him to move in with her, to stop living in what she perceived as a shrine to his deceased wife. According to her, Roger became increasingly distressed about this prospect. Because his deceased wife was very much alive and living in that house, I said, the bitter irony of it almost overwhelming.
Exactly.
At this point, approximately 3 months ago, we believe he began considering a permanent solution to his situation. The clinical way she phrased it, a permanent solution rather than murdering his wife, somehow made it more horrifying. The financial transactions you discovered were indeed connected to this plan, Harriman continued, spreading several documents on the table. The $50,000 withdrawn from your joint investment account was divided. Some went into the account you found, which appears to have been intended as a financial cushion during the transition period after your death. The jewelry purchases were gifts for Ms. Lauder. Each revelation was like another blow, but I remained outwardly composed, the decades of maintaining classroom discipline serving me well in this moment of extreme emotional duress. "And the life insurance policy?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady. "That's where it gets interesting." Harriman's expression shifted subtly. "The policy was indeed taken out without your knowledge or consent, which is fraud. However, there's a detail you might not have noticed on the paperwork." She slid another document across the table, a copy of the insurance policy I'd discovered. She pointed to a section I hadn't focused on previously. The policy was initiated on March 10th, but the waiting period clause specifies that death benefits won't be paid for any death occurring less than 30 days after the policy date. Your husband's attempt to poison you occurred on April 8th. I stared at the document, understanding dawning slowly. 1 week too early.
Exactly.
If he had succeeded in killing you, the insurance company would not have paid the death benefit. The policy would have been essentially worthless. I looked up confused. But why? Why take out a policy and then act before it would pay? "That's what confused us initially," Harriman admitted. "It didn't make sense, unless the insurance policy wasn't the primary motivation." "What do you mean?" "Based on our interviews and evidence, we believe your husband was under increasing pressure from Ms. Lauder to make their relationship public, to move in with her permanently. The existence of a living wife was an insurmountable obstacle to those plans. So he decided to remove the obstacle," I said flatly.
Yes.
"But he also needed financial security. The life insurance was meant to provide that, but he miscalculated the timing. According to his own statement, he believed the waiting period was 15 days, not 30. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. My husband of 42 years had tried to murder me for another woman, and he hadn't even bothered to read the fine print on the insurance policy that was supposed to fund his new life. "What happens now?" I asked. "Your husband has been charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and several other related offenses. Given the evidence, his attorney will likely advise him to accept a plea deal, but that's still being negotiated." "And Ms. Lauder?" "At this point, we have no evidence she was aware of his plans or his true marital status. She appears to be as much a victim of his deception as you were, albeit in a different way." I nodded, trying to absorb everything. "Is there anything else I should know?" Harriman hesitated. "There is one more thing. During our search of your home, we discovered a journal in your husband's golf bag. It contains detailed entries about his relationship with Ms. Lauder, his growing resentment toward you, and, eventually, his plans to eliminate you." She slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook I'd never seen before. "This is a copy," she explained. "The original is in evidence. But we thought you should see it. It might help you understand, if understanding is even possible in a situation like this." I stared at the journal, uncertain if I wanted to read the private thoughts of a man who had shared my bed, my home, my life for more than 4 decades, only to decide that killing me was preferable to the social and financial complications of divorce. "Thank you," I said finally, taking the bagged journal. "I'll consider it." As I stood to leave, Harriman gave me a searching look. "Mrs. Derrick, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've seen all kinds of betrayal. But what your husband did, the calculation, the deception maintained over months while living as your spouse, it's extraordinary. I want you to know that none of this reflects on you. Some people simply hide their true nature very, very well." Her words were meant to be comforting, I knew, but they only underscored the devastating reality I was facing. The man I had loved and trusted for most of my life had never truly existed. Margaret and Harold's guest room became my refuge as spring blossomed outside the windows. I spent days there, emerging only for meals, processing the destruction of my marriage and the near destruction of my life. The journal remained unopened on the nightstand. I wasn't ready to read Roger's words, to see our marriage through the distorted lens of his growing contempt.
Not yet.
Instead, I focused on practical matters. My attorney helped me secure court orders freezing our joint assets and preventing Roger from making any financial decisions while awaiting trial. I spoke with our children, a devastating conversation where I had to explain that their father had been charged with attempting to murder me. Their shock and grief mirrored my own, a shared trauma that would take years to process. "I just can't believe it," Sarah said, her voice breaking over the phone. "Dad? Our dad tried to. I can't even say it." "I know," I soothed, mothering instincts overriding my own pain. "I can hardly believe it myself. But why? After all these years, why not just ask for a divorce?" It was the question everyone asked, the one I asked myself continuously. Why choose murder over divorce? The financial cost would have been similar. The emotional cost for our family would have been significant, but survivable. What could possibly make death seem like the better option? 2 weeks after Roger's arrest, I finally picked up the journal. The first entry was dated 6 months ago, around the time he'd met Christine Lauder at the hospital fundraiser. His handwriting, so familiar from decades of birthday cards and grocery lists, filled the pages with a narrative I barely recognized. Met an extraordinary woman tonight. Christine Lauder. Elegant, intelligent, financially independent. Sits on the hospital board. Felt an immediate connection unlike anything I've experienced in decades. I forced myself to continue reading, each page revealing more of my husband's double life and his growing resentment toward me and our marriage. Told Christine my wife died 3 years ago.
Cancer.
The lie came easily, which should disturb me more than it does. But it feels like a different life, one where possibilities still exist. Elena and I have been going through the motions for years. She doesn't see it or chooses not to. Either way, when I'm with Christine, I feel alive again. As the entries progressed, his justifications became more elaborate, his attitude toward me more contemptuous. Elena asked about the conference in Philadelphia today. Another lie. Spent the weekend with Christine in her Boston apartment instead. The deception is becoming second nature. Elena suspects nothing. She's too busy with her book club and grandchildren to notice my absence. Sometimes I wonder if she'd notice if I disappeared entirely. The callousness was breathtaking. This man had shared my bed, my meals, my life, while secretly despising my contentment with our retirement years, our grandchildren, our quiet routines. Christine wants me to move in with her permanently. Keeps asking why I'm still living in that mausoleum to your dead wife. The irony isn't lost on me. My dead wife is very much alive, cooking dinner and asking about my day. If only she knew. Then, 3 months ago, the entries took a darker turn. Looked into divorce today. The financial implications are staggering. Half of everything we've built over 42 years would go to Elena. My pension split. The house sold. At my age, starting over with those financial constraints is unthinkable. There has to be another way. The other way began to take shape in subsequent entries, a plan so cold-blooded it was difficult to comprehend it had been conceived by someone I had loved and trusted completely. Research life insurance policies today. If Elena were to die unexpectedly, the financial picture would be entirely different. As her husband, I'd inherit everything, plus the insurance payout. A clean break. A fresh start with Christine. Is it wrong that this solution feels increasingly logical? Page after page detailed his evolving plan. The research into poisons, The consultations with the attorney about inheritance laws, the creation of a financial cushion, the careful timing of my accidental death to avoid suspicion. Thallium seems ideal. Gradual poisoning over weeks would appear as a natural illness. By the time anyone might think to test for it specifically, cremation would eliminate the evidence. Elena prefers her coffee with cream, perfect for masking any subtle taste. We'll begin with minute doses next week. The final entry, dated the day before his return from the fictitious Chicago conference, was perhaps the most chilling. Everything in place. Insurance policy in effect. Final dose ready. Elena's doctor appointment perfectly timed. She'll report symptoms that sound like early cardiac issues, but no blood tests that might raise questions. Within days, it will be over. A grieving widower free to begin again, financially secure. Christine already discussing travel plans for summer. Just one final deception, one last act, and this double life ends. Elena would never understand what she had become, an obstacle to happiness, a financial burden, a reminder of decades of quiet desperation. Better this way. Painless for her, freedom for me. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The man who had written these words, this calculating, remorseless stranger, had kissed me goodbye each morning, had attended our grandchildren's birthday parties, had brought me tea when I had a cold just a month earlier. Had it all been performance? Had 42 years of marriage been nothing but an elaborate lie, culminating in this final, monstrous betrayal? I didn't sleep that night, the journal's revelations playing endlessly through my mind. By morning, I had reached a decision. I would not allow Roger's actions to destroy me, not physically through poison, and not emotionally through the devastation of betrayal. I called Detective Harriman. "I'd like to speak with Christine Lauder," I said when she answered. There was a pause on the line. "Mrs. Derrick, I'm not sure that's advisable."
Please.
"I need to understand. All of it. And I think she might need to understand, too." After some consideration, Harriman agreed to arrange a meeting on neutral ground, her office at the police station, with certain conditions. Christine Lauder had agreed, apparently as desperate for answers as I was. 2 days later, I sat in a small conference room, waiting. When the door opened, I found myself face to face with the woman my husband had been willing to kill for. Christine Lauder was striking in person. Tall and slender, with expertly styled silver hair and the kind of bone structure that ages beautifully. She wore an understated but clearly expensive navy dress, minimal jewelry, and an expression of complete devastation. "Mrs. Derrick," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am." "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "And it's Elena." She sank into the chair, her composure clearly fragile. "I want you to know I had no idea Roger was married. None. He told me his wife, you, had died of cancer 3 years ago. He described the treatments, the hospice care, everything in such detail." Her voice broke. I believed every word. I nodded, studying her closely. Detective Harriman had found no evidence linking Christine to Roger's plans, and seeing her now, I believed she had been as deceived as I had been, perhaps more so, since her entire relationship had been built on a fundamental lie. "I didn't come here to blame you," I said carefully. "I came because I need to understand what happened to my marriage. And I thought perhaps you might need answers, too." Christine's eyes filled with tears. "How could he do this? To you, to me, to your family? What kind of person plans something like this?" "That's what I'm trying to understand. The man described in his journal, the man you knew, bears no resemblance to the husband I thought I had for 42 years. Journal." Christine looked confused. I hesitated, then pushed the evidence bag containing Roger's journal across the table. "The police found this. It details everything. His relationship with you, his growing resentment toward me, and, eventually, his plan to murder me rather than face divorce. Christine stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake, making no move to touch it. I don't know if I can bear to read it. I understand. I almost couldn't myself. But it answered questions I needed answered. Was any of it real? What we had? The vulnerability in her question mirrored my own internal struggle. I don't know. I've been asking myself the same thing about 42 years of marriage. I met her eyes directly.
What did he tell you about me?
About his deceased wife. Christine looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He said you were a high school English teacher, that you loved gardening and classic films, that your marriage had been happy but quiet, routine. She hesitated. He said by the end, you'd become, this sounds terrible, rather boring, set in your ways, uninterested in travel or new experiences. The casual cruelty of it stung. I see. He showed me pictures of your garden, said you'd created it together, and maintaining it was his way of honoring your memory. She gave a bitter laugh. God, how easily I believed it all. The grieving widower, tending his dead wife's flowers, finally ready to love again. It was like something from a novel. Or a bad film, I said, surprising myself with a touch of dark humor. Christine looked startled, then gave a small, sad smile.
Yes.
A very bad film. We sat in silence for a moment, two women united by the devastating actions of a man we had both loved, in our different ways. Did he ever mention our children? I asked finally. Our grandchildren? Christine nodded. He spoke of them often, actually. Sarah and Michael. The grandchildren, Emma, Jack, and Lily. He seemed genuinely proud, showed me pictures.
She paused.
That makes it worse somehow, doesn't it? That he could love them, be proud of them, while planning to destroy their family completely, I finished. Yes, it does. I don't understand it, Christine said, genuine anguish in her voice. If he wanted to be with me, why not simply ask for a divorce? I have my own money. He wouldn't have needed to. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. According to his journal, he couldn't bear the financial implications. The division of assets, splitting the pension, selling the house. At our age, starting over with diminished resources. I spread my hands. Apparently murdering me seemed more practical. The blunt statement hung in the air between us. I feel responsible, Christine said after a moment. If I hadn't pursued him, if I hadn't pressed for a more permanent arrangement. No, I said firmly. Whatever my husband became, whatever dark impulses drove him to this, they were not your creation. He chose deception at every turn, with you, with me, with everyone. Those choices were his alone. We talked for nearly 2 hours, piecing together the fragments of our relationships with Roger, trying to construct a coherent narrative from the wreckage of his deceptions. By the time we parted, something like understanding had formed between us. Not friendship, certainly, but a mutual recognition of shared victimhood and the long road to recovery ahead. What will you do now? Christine asked as we prepared to leave. Rebuild, I said simply. My life, my sense of security, my relationships with my children and grandchildren. Roger took many things from me, but he doesn't get to take my future. Christine nodded, a new resolve in her expression. No, he doesn't get to take that from either of us. As we walked out of the police station into the bright spring afternoon, I felt a weight lifting, not the entire burden of betrayal and near-death, but enough to allow me to glimpse a path forward. The man I had loved for most of my life had tried to kill me. That reality would never change, never diminish in its horror. But I had survived. Not by chance or luck, but through my own instincts, my own actions. I had recognized the danger, gathered evidence, created a plan, and ultimately saved my own life by refusing to drink from the poison cup. That knowledge, terrible as the circumstances were, gave me strength. Roger had failed, and I would not. Summer arrived with a blaze of heat and humidity unusual for early June. I had moved from Margaret and Harold's guest room to a small apartment near the community college, where I'd taught for 30 years before retirement. The familiar surroundings provided comfort as I navigated the complex process of disentangling my life from Roger's, legally, financially, and emotionally. The district attorney had offered Roger a plea deal, 25 years for attempted murder, with additional concurrent sentences for fraud and other charges. Given the overwhelming evidence, including his own journal and the poisoned coffee, his court-appointed attorney had strongly advised him to accept. But Roger, in what I now recognized as characteristic arrogance, had refused. He wanted a trial, apparently believing he could somehow persuade a jury of reasonable doubt despite the mountain of evidence against him. The trial was scheduled for September. In the meantime, I focused on reconstruction, meeting regularly with my attorney, my financial advisor, and a therapist specializing in trauma and betrayal. My children visited often, their initial shock and disbelief gradually giving way to a protective ferocity that was both touching and occasionally overwhelming. "Mom, you should move to Portland," Sarah suggested during one visit. "Be near us, near Emma. We have that mother-in-law suite that's just sitting empty." "Or Atlanta," Michael countered during his turn. "The boys would love having Grandma close by." I appreciated their concern, but knew I needed to make my own decisions, create my own path forward. "I'm not ready to leave yet," I told them gently. "This is still my community, my support system. But I promise to consider all options once the trial is over." The trial. It loomed in my consciousness, simultaneously dreaded and anticipated. I would have to testify, to face Roger across a courtroom, to speak aloud the details of his betrayal and my narrow escape from his murderous plan. A week before the trial was set to begin, Detective Harriman called with unexpected news. "Mrs. Derrick, Roger has changed his mind. He's accepting the plea deal." I sat heavily on my small apartment sofa. Why the sudden change? His attorney received the complete evidence package, including testimony from the lab technicians about the concentration of thallium in your coffee. Apparently, seeing the scientific proof in black and white finally convinced him that his defense had no chance of success. Relief flooded through me. No trial. No public recounting of the most painful chapter of my life. No facing Roger across a courtroom, seeing the face I had loved for decades now consumed with resentment and calculation. "What happens now?" I asked. "He'll appear before the judge next week for a formal plea and sentencing. You have the right to make a victim impact statement if you wish." Did I wish to speak? To give voice to the devastation Roger had caused, the trust he had shattered, the life he had nearly taken? I wasn't sure. "I'll think about it," I said. But as the date approached, I knew with increasing certainty that I needed to speak, not for Roger's benefit, but for my own. I needed to stand in that courtroom, look my would-be murderer in the eye, and reclaim my narrative from the distortions of his journal. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, warm despite the air conditioning laboring against the late summer heat. I sat in the front row, Margaret beside me, my children flanking us like protective sentinels. Roger sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped in a posture I'd never seen before, defeated, diminished. When he entered his guilty plea, his voice was barely audible. The judge asked him to speak up, to confirm that he understood the charges and the sentence he was accepting. Roger complied, his gaze fixed on the table before him, never once looking in my direction. Then it was my turn. I approached the podium, my prepared statement in hand, but as I faced the court, I set the paper aside. What I needed to say couldn't be scripted. "My name is Elena Derrick," I began, my voice steady. "For 42 years, I believed I was married to a man who loved me."
who respected me.
who would protect me from harm, not become the source of it. Now Roger looked up, his expression unreadable. The man sitting at that table planned my death in meticulous detail. He researched poisons, created alibis, calculated financial benefits, all while sharing meals with me, sleeping beside me, participating in family gatherings. He did this not in a moment of passion or temporary insanity, but through months of sustained, deliberate planning. I paused, gathering strength for what came next. In his journal, my husband described me as an obstacle to his happiness, a financial burden, a reminder of what he called decades of quiet desperation. He decided that killing me was more convenient than divorcing me, more practical than having an honest conversation about the state of our marriage. Roger's gaze dropped again, his shoulders hunching slightly. I want the court to understand the magnitude of this betrayal. This was not a crime of opportunity or impulse. This was calculated, researched, practiced through smaller doses administered over weeks. This was a man who decided, after 42 years of marriage, that his wife's life had no value beyond its inconvenience to his future plans. My voice remained strong, fueled by a righteous anger that had been building since I first discovered the insurance policy. I read his journal, every page, every detailed plan for my death, every contemptuous dismissal of our shared life. And I want him to know something. I looked directly at Roger, waiting until he reluctantly raised his eyes to meet mine. You failed, not just in your attempt to kill me, but in your understanding of who I am. You wrote that I was unobservant, set in my ways, easily deceived. You were wrong. I noticed the insurance policy. I questioned your absences. I smelled the metallic odor in the coffee you so carefully prepared. I saved my own life through the very qualities you dismissed. Roger's face had gone pale, his eyes locked with mine now in what appeared to be genuine shock. The sentence you're receiving today is just. But no prison term can truly account for the life you stole from me, not through death, but through the destruction of 42 years of memories, now forever tainted by the knowledge of who you really are. I took a deep breath, nearing the conclusion of what I needed to say. Despite everything, I stand here today not as a victim, but as a survivor. You didn't succeed in killing me, and you won't succeed in destroying my capacity for joy, for trust, for a meaningful future. That's the final failure in your careful plan. I will rebuild. I will thrive. I will find happiness again. With that, I returned to my seat, legs shaking but spirit unbowed. The judge thanked me for my statement, then proceeded with formal sentencing, 25 years as per the agreement, with no possibility of parole for at least 20. As Roger was led away in handcuffs, he turned briefly in my direction. For a moment, I glimpsed something in his expression that might have been remorse, or perhaps just the final recognition that he had underestimated me completely. Either way, it was the last time I would see the man I had married, the man who had shared my life, the man who had meticulously planned my death. The door closed behind him, and a chapter of my life, the longest, most significant chapter, closed with it. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by my children, Margaret and Harold, and a few close friends who had come to support me, I lifted my face to the late summer sun. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her arm around my shoulders. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." And for the first time since discovering that insurance policy in a drawer 4 months earlier, I truly believed it. The coastline of southern Maine stretched before me, rugged and beautiful in the crisp autumn light. I sat on the small deck of my rented cottage, a steaming mug of tea, prepared by my own hands, warming my palms against the October chill. In the year since Roger's sentencing, I had remade my life piece by piece. The legal separation of our assets had been complex but ultimately fair, leaving me financially secure, if not wealthy. I had sold our family home, unable to imagine living there again, and used part of the proceeds to purchase a small condominium in a community for active seniors. The rest I had set aside for travel, for experiences long deferred, for the education funds of my grandchildren. My relationship with Christine Lauder had evolved in unexpected ways. Initially linked only by our shared victimization, we had developed a cautious friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. She had moved to California to be near her own daughter and grandchildren, but we spoke monthly, comparing notes on our healing journeys. The psychological aftermath of Roger's betrayal had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of recovery. Learning to trust again, not just potential romantic partners but my own judgment, was a slow, painstaking process. My therapist likened it to rehabilitating a broken limb: gradual strengthening, occasional setbacks, persistent effort. But I had made progress. Significant progress. I had opened myself to new friendships, new experiences, new perspectives on what my remaining years might hold, including perhaps new love. As if summoned by the thought, David appeared in the doorway behind me. "Tea getting cold?" he asked, his voice carrying the slight lilt of his native Scotland. "Just right," I replied, smiling as he settled into the chair beside mine. David Fraser had entered my life 6 months earlier, a retired history professor and widower who shared my love of literature and hiking. Our relationship had developed slowly, both of us carrying the emotional scars of our past, his from grief, mine from betrayal. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, his weathered hand covering mine on the deck railing. "Just reflecting. It's been a year today since the sentencing." David nodded, understanding without the need for elaboration. I had told him everything early in our friendship, wanting complete transparency about the trauma that had shaped my recent life. "And how do you feel about that milestone?" I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I said finally. "Like I've set down a heavy burden I didn't realize I was still carrying." "Good." He squeezed my hand gently. "You deserve that lightness, Selena. After everything, you deserve every moment of joy you can find." We sat in comfortable silence, watching seagulls wheel against the darkening sky. In the distance, a lighthouse beam began its rhythmic sweep, a beacon of warning and guidance both. My phone chimed softly, a text from Sarah with a new photo of Emma, now 4 and beaming with a missing front tooth. I showed it to David, who smiled appreciatively. "You'll be flying out to see them next week, yes?" "Thursday through Monday. Emma has a dance recital she's very excited about." Another comfortable silence fell between us. This was one of the things I appreciated most about David: his ease with quiet moments, his lack of need to fill every space with words. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about taking a trip this winter. Somewhere warm. The Bahamas, perhaps, or the southern coast of Spain." He turned to face me directly. "Would you consider joining me?" The invitation was carefully phrased, respectful of my independence, my potential hesitations, my still healing heart. But there was hope in his eyes, and something more. A year ago, such an invitation would have terrified me. The idea of trusting another man, of making myself vulnerable again, would have seemed impossible. But now, watching the lighthouse beam make its steady circuit, I found myself considering possibilities rather than dangers. "I think," I said slowly, "that Spain sounds wonderful in winter. All that sunshine, all that history." David's smile was like the lighthouse beam, steady, illuminating, trustworthy. "Excellent. We'll start planning when you return from Portland." As dusk deepened into early evening, we retreated inside to prepare dinner together, a simple meal of fish chowder and crusty bread. The small cottage kitchen was warm and fragrant with herbs and spices, the routine of cooking alongside someone both novel and comforting. Later, sharing wine by the small fireplace, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the discovery of betrayal to the narrowly averted poisoning, from the devastating revelations of the trial to the slow, painful process of rebuilding, each step had led me here, to this moment of quiet contentment in a coastal cottage with a man who asked for nothing but my company. Roger had failed in every aspect of his plan.
He had not taken my life.
He had not destroyed my capacity for joy. He had not even succeeded in erasing the possibility of love from my future. His final gift to me, ironically, had been freedom. Freedom from a marriage that had apparently been hollow for years. Freedom to discover my own strength. Freedom to reimagine my life on my own terms. More wine, David offered, interrupting my thoughts. I smiled, extending my glass. Yes, please. As he poured, I made a silent toast to myself, to the woman who had noticed an insurance policy hidden in a drawer, who had smelled something metallic in her coffee, who had trusted her instincts and saved her own life. To the woman who had swapped cups and exposed a would-be murderer. To the woman I had become. If you enjoyed this story of survival and sweet revenge, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload from her true stories. Have you ever had that moment when something just didn't feel right and your instincts saved you? Share your experiences in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most important person to trust is yourself. Tag someone who needs to read this powerful story of resilience.